condensed version of my sort of story leading up to that is I was experiencing a myriad of symptoms that just never seemed to make sense. I was getting dizzy. I was having joint pain. I was having muscle aches, all kinds of things, starting back in 2007. And the beginning of 2008, I decided, okay, something is wrong here. I need to start, I need to see a doctor. I need to find out what's going on. And I spent 4 years going from doctor to doctor to doctor with them completely dismissing me because although I said, a laundry list of symptoms, they said I looked fine. And the tests that they ran didn't really show much. And they just kind of left it at that. And I was just stuck. And then after that, I developed some new symptoms that were actually more visible, some joint swelling and rashes that, they could no longer tell me, hey, this is just in your head. Maybe you're just depressed. I think that's one of the things so many of us have heard so often. And it seems to be what doctors will say, what many doctors, I don't want to say all of them, but what many doctors have said when they don't see an answer or they don't see an easy answer, they just tell us that there's nothing wrong. And when I finally had these new symptoms that, were clearly not in my head, depression does not make your ankles swell up so that you can't put your shoes on. I finally had somebody who said, okay, yes, something is wrong. And then I spent another 4 years of rotating diagnoses. Maybe it's lupus. No, I don't think it is. Maybe it's RA. No, I don't think it is. And we went through so many different diagnoses. And then we came up with sarcoidosis. And again, this is a rare disease. It's not something I would expect people to find right off the bat. But then because it's a rare disease that can affect so many different organs and systems throughout the body, it really needed to be addressed or examined kind of top to bottom. But most of the doctors that I had were not familiar with sarcoidosis. And as a result, if there was a new symptom that I said, I have this problem, they said, oh, well, it's probably the sarcoidosis. Or if I said, I have, do you think this might be, they said, no, I don't think it is. And they'd kind of just brush it off without any further examination because they didn't understand what sarcoidosis was. So they also didn't understand what was and what wasn't. And that's where I, had a lot of trouble getting answers. And this rheumatologist who I see now, she understands sarcoidosis and she's able to see which things fall under that category, which things fall under other autoimmune arthritis categories, which things fall under a different specialist purview. And so I really have that well-rounded approach, which I really, really needed. And so many of us do.
Got it. All right. I'm going to turn it over here to Lisa in a minute to comment on this because we want to hear a little bit about your experience. We know that there are a lot of times, I'm sure, where people come in and they're not ticking all the boxes. And for us as patients, there so often will feel dismissed or not heard. And I know, Lisa, you and I talked about several articles that have come out recently in the last year. I know there was one that was highlighted quite often at EULAR 2022 conference that was on this idea of being dismissed and what that does to break down a breakdown of communication and trust and how that can even impact healthcare. So I just thought it would be a good opportunity just to weigh in on that's got to happen to you, right? As a doctor, people come in, they're not ticking the boxes, their labs look great, but what do we do? How do you handle that as a rheumatologist?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is that, so I explained that rheumatology is like art appreciation. And so because for our diseases, there's very rarely is there one test that is going to definitively say, yes, this is what you have. As opposed to other medical conditions, like hyperlipidemia, your cholesterol is either high or it's not, or diabetes, your sugar is either high or it's not. And we really don't have things like that in rheumatology. Instead, it's very much a clinical specialty where we listen to patients, we hear their symptoms, and then it's up to the doctor to interpret the labs and the diagnostic studies in the context of those symptoms. And because of that, it is imperfect. There's a couple of themes that I'd like to capitalize on that Kerry just shared.
Yes.
And the first is this concept of non-specific symptoms and then being told, oh, you're depressed. It's all in your head kind of thing. So autoimmune conditions, they develop over time. And we know that some people, they get all the symptoms all at once. And it's very obvious, like you come in with the rash and the joint pain and all the other things, like boom, we can diagnose that because you fit kind of what we call an illness script. You fit the description of what a condition looks like, which is what we're trying to do as rheumatologists, match patient symptoms to what these conditions sound like and look like in real life. But for those patients who don't have that boom, all of a sudden, everything all at once, and instead they kind of have this gradual progression of accruing non-specific symptoms over time, it can be really challenging because there are many, many people in the world that have similar symptoms that don't have an autoimmune disease. And we don't want to misdiagnose somebody and put them on medications that can cause a lot of harm, especially nowadays in a pandemic. And more so, as I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast is familiar with, our immunosuppression doesn't really help fatigue all that much. And it doesn't really help the non-specific symptoms all that much. It's very frustrating. So usually how I explain it to patients is that, like at this point in time, I don't think so two things there. At this point in time, and then I don't think, everything's hedged. So I don't think you have an autoimmune disease, but something can always develop in the future. And so if something more develops, please come back and we will repeat the assessment, because that's the best I can do at that point in time. And I don't know how other physicians do it, have that conversation, but the hope is really by saying just that simple sentence and kind of setting the stage in that way, validating that you are having these symptoms, explaining that they're non-specific, they don't necessarily fit any one disease, and that things can progress, and my door's always open, come on back whenever something else happens.